The oil sizzled loudly as Madam Chopfinger dropped another roll of dough into the bubbling pan. A thick aroma of vanilla and fried sugar filled the air, dancing through the village like a tempting curse. She stood there in her crisp white apron, smiling, but not the smile of a happy baker. No, this was the wicked smile of a woman hiding a dark secret beneath every golden crust. With each roll of her spatula, the pastries browned to perfection, crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, and dangerously addictive, far and wide for a single bite. But none of them knew they weren't just eating pastries, they were eating their future. It was a quiet morning in the village of Rose Hill, but the air around the town square was anything but calm. A long line had already formed in front of a little bakery that opened just 6 months ago. The name on the wooden sign read, Madam Chopfinger Sweet Crust, fresh, irresistible, unforgettable. And unforgettable it truly was. From as early as 5 a.m., villagers would line up, men, women, children, even the elderly, waiting for the bakery's door to open. The sweet, rich scent of fried dough and spicy fillings drifted through the air like a spell, wrapping around them, pulling them in with invisible hands. Inside the bakery, Madam Chopfinger stood behind the counter, dressed in a clean white apron and gloves that she never removed. Her skin was pale like cloud dust, her eyes sharp and distant. She walked silently, her hands moving fast as she shaped, stuffed, and folded the dough. Every pasty was perfectly golden, fried until the crust was just the right amount of crisp. The fillings, savory, spicy, buttery, melted on the tongue, and the honey-glazed buns were warm, soft, and sweet enough to make grown men weep. No one knew how she made them. No one ever saw her buy ingredients, and no one ever dared to ask. Madam Chopfinger didn't talk much, but she always wore a calm, pleasant smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her voice was gentle, polite, almost musical. "Thank you, enjoy," she would say as she handed out the brown paper-wrapped pastries. But behind her sweet smell and warm welcome, something dark lived inside her shop. Every week, always on a Thursday, one person from the village would mysteriously disappear. A school teacher, a fisherman, a woman selling oranges by the roadside. Gone, without a trace. The villagers whispered about those disappearances, but never too loudly, because as long as they weren't the ones missing, and as long as Madam Chopfinger kept serving those pastries, they didn't want to think too hard about it. They were addicted. They couldn't stop eating them. Even when their stomachs were full, even when they felt sick, they still found themselves lining up again the next day. The effects were subtle at first. Some people began to forget small things. What day it was, where they put their keys, the names of neighbors. Others started hearing things at night, strange whispering sounds from their kitchens. Children would sleepwalk to the bakery doorstep. People lost weight, even though they were eating more than ever. Still, no one stopped. Madam Chopfinger's bakery became famous beyond Rose Hill. People traveled in from other villages. Some claimed her pastries cured headaches. Others said it helped them sleep. A few believed it brought them luck. But no one realized the truth. Every bite they took, they were chewing on someone's life. Every mouthful of sweetness came from someone else's stolen years. Because once a week, just before dawn, Madam Chopfinger would select her sacrifice. She always chose someone who wouldn't be missed too quickly, someone alone, forgotten or unloved. She would lure them in, offer them a free taste, and before sunrise, they were gone. Their essence, what made them who they were, was mixed into the dough. Their spirit was pressed into the crust, sealed in butter, and baked into something that made people crave more. And her bakery, it was alive. The walls breathed. The ovens hissed even when turned off. Her flour never ran out, and her oil never spoiled. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, one young girl named Grace stood outside the bakery, staring. She was new in the village, quiet, observant, always watching. She didn't eat the pastries like the others, She didn't laugh or drool or dance in line. She just stood across the road every day, eyes fixed on Madam Chopfinger as if trying to see something no one else could. That day, Madam Chopfinger noticed her too. Their eyes met, and something in Grace's calm, steady stare made Madam Chopfinger smile falter for just a moment. But sometimes, even curses meet their match, and sometimes, the past isn't as buried as we think. Grace had come to Rose Hill with hope in her heart and a simple dream to start over. After leaving behind a painful past in the city, she opened a small bakery at the edge of the village. She painted the walls herself, installed a modest oven, and used all her savings to buy ingredients. The smell of vanilla, cinnamon, and nutmeg filled the air every morning. She baked with love and care, waiting for customers to come, but no one ever did. They all walked past her little shop with polite smiles, their eyes fixed on the glowing light of Madam Chopfinger's street cross at the center of the town. At first, Grace thought it was just bad luck, but every day she sat alone in her empty shop, while crowds lined up at Madam Chopfinger's. It felt like a silent punishment. She watched as people danced in excitement while holding greasy brown paper bags filled with pastries they couldn't seem to leave it out. What could be so special about fried dough? Why was her shop invisible? Weeks passed, and Grace's anger grew. She began to notice things, strange things. Madam Chopfinger never bought supplies from the village markets. She never ran out of flour or oil. Her hands were always glued, her smile always fixed, her eyes always watching, calculating. What made Grace's blood boil the most wasn't just the success. It was the way the villagers worshipped Madam Chopfinger, like a goddess, like she was untouchable. Her bakery, once just a small wooden shop, had grown into a full-blown pastry house with polished glass, red and gold branding, and even delivery boys in branded uniforms. Madam Chopfinger had built a mansion on the hill, tall and glowing, with white walls and tiled balconies. She drove a silver SUV that gleamed under the sun, wore designer clothes, imported perfumes, and carried luxury handbags worth more than Grace's entire shop. And still, she smiled sweetly, like nothing had changed. Her pastries were now the centerpiece of every village celebration. Birthdays, weddings, naming ceremonies, even funerals. People ordered them weeks in advance. Neighboring towns sent in bulk requests. She was a sensation. And no one, not even the chief, questioned how she rose from nothing to everything in just a few months. But Grace saw through the glitter. She saw the hunger behind Madam Chopfinger's smile. So she made up her mind. She was going to find out the truth, and she was going to bring her down. One rainy evening, Grace left her shop early and followed the scent of cinnamon and burnt sugar to the back of Madam Chopfinger's bakery. The building hummed with quiet life. Steam rose from the kitchen vents. The smell of fried dough was thick, almost dizzying. But what caught Grace's attention was the silence. There were no workers inside, no one helping, just Madam Chopfinger, moving like a shadow between ovens, her gloved fingers working faster than humanly possible. Grace hid behind a pile of firewood and waited. Suddenly, the bakery lights flickered, the air grew cold. Then she saw it. Madam Chopfinger walking out the back door, dragging a sack. It was long, heavy. Something inside shifted slightly, like a limp arm. Grace's breath caught in her throat. She watched as Madam Chopfinger moved quickly into the nearby woods. Grace followed, her fingers silent in the wet grass. Her eyes locked on the figure ahead. They walked for nearly 10 minutes before they reached a clearing, an open patch beneath the moonlight, surrounded by twisted trees. There, Grace saw something she would never forget. Madam Chopfinger knelt before a flat stone altar, her gloved hands shaking as she opened the sack. The body of a young man slid out, his face pale, lifeless. She pulled out a knife. Curved and ancient, she began to chant in a language Grace didn't understand. With every word, the wind howled, the trees groaned, the earth beneath them trembled slightly. Grace stared, frozen, as Madam Chopfinger placed her hand over the man's chest and began to extract something glowing. A faint, flickering light that hovered in the air like a soul. She trapped it in a glass jar, sealed it with wax, and whispered to it. Then she smiled, not her usual warm smile. This was darker, hollow, unhinged. She stood, wiped her gloves on her apron, and turned, staring directly at the tree where Grace was hiding. Their eyes met, but Madam Chopfinger said nothing. She simply turned back toward the village and disappeared into the trees. Grace stayed frozen in place, her heart pounding in her chest. She now knew the truth. The sweet smell, the perfect crust, the addicting taste. It wasn't just baking, it was sacrifice. Madam Chopfinger wasn't feeding the village. She was feeding off it. And worse, no one was safe. The next morning, after what Grace had witnessed in the forest, she didn't open her bakery. She sat on the floor of her bedroom, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her skin was cold, but her face was sweating. Her mind replayed the horrifying scene over and over again. The glowing soul, the lifeless body, the chants that made the earth rumble. Madam Chopfinger had looked directly at her. She saw her and she let her go. That was the part that scared Grace the most. Why? Why didn't she attack her? Why didn't she say a word? That question haunted Grace all week. She avoided the town square. She barely touched her food. She kept the curtains of her shop closed and only stepped outside to fetch water or sweep her doorway. The villagers whispered, thinking maybe she had given up. Perhaps she was packing up to leave like all the other failed bakers. But Grace wasn't giving up. She was laying low, waiting, planning, praying. One sunny Sunday afternoon, as the church bells echoed through Rose Hill, Grace returned from the river where she had gone to fetch water. She walked back slowly, her mind heavy with fear and anger. When she stepped into her shop and dropped her bucket near the counter, she froze. Someone was already sitting there. A tall woman in a spotless white gown, legs crossed elegantly, gloved fingers gently stroking the table. Madam Chopfinger. Her presence sucked the air out of the room. She didn't speak at first. She simply looked around, her sharp eyes scanning Grace's empty shop with mild amusement. The walls were bare, the shelves full, the pastries untouched. Finally she spoke, her voice soft, slow, like a blade wrapped in silk. You have been quiet, Grace. Grace swallowed hard. Her hands trembled at her sides, but she said nothing. Madam Chopfinger stood, adjusting her gloves. She walked closer, her heels clicking gently against the wooden floor. I'm going to say this once, she whispered, stopping inches from Grace. Her breath smelled faintly of sugar and something burnt. If you open that mouth of yours and tell anyone what you saw, she leaned closer. You'll be the next flavor in my honey glazed rolls. Grace flinched. Her heart pounded so loudly. She thought Madam Chopfinger could hear it. And besides, the woman added, stepping back, her tone almost playful. Who would believe you? The whole village adores me. They crave me. They would fight for me. They would die for a bite of my pastry. You? She looked around. You are invisible. Madam Chopfinger smiled, cold, controlled, wicked. She reached into her purse, pulled out a small cream-filled pastry, and placed it on Grace's counter, just in case she ever forgets who is in charge. Then she turned and walked out, her white gown trailing softly behind her. Grace stood still for a long time. She stared at the cream-filled pastry on her counter like it was poison. Her legs refused to move. Her hands were clammy, her throat tight. The fear was real, but the rage underneath it was stronger. That night, the village square buzzed with joy as Madam Chopfinger hosted a free tasting for her new recipe, vanilla glazed cinnamon puffs. Children danced with powdered sugar on their lips. The elders blessed her. The chief raised a toast, and no one noticed the girl in the shadows, Grace, watching silently. She knew Madam Chopfinger wasn't just feeding pastries. She was feeding addiction, feeding debt, feeding something darker behind her perfect smile. Grace couldn't run, not anymore. She couldn't unsee what she saw, and she couldn't let the village crumble into the belly of evil. She was scared, yes, but somewhere deep inside her, A small fire had started burning. She would find a way to expose Madam Chopfinger, even if it cost her everything. For weeks, Grace stayed in the shadows, observing, tracking, studying. She had memorized Madam Chopfinger's routine. When she opened her shop, when she closed, and most importantly, when she disappeared into the night with a heavy sack and returned just before dawn. Grace never got too close. She hid behind trees, behind cars, watching in silence as Madam Chopfinger dragged lifeless bodies into that hidden altar, deep in the woods. Sometimes she whispered, sometimes she chanted, and every time she returned with that same glass jar, glowing faintly, flickering like it carried a soul. Grace documented everything. Finally, with enough evidence in hand, she went to the palace of the village king, King Desmond, an aging, stern-faced man who ruled Rose Hill with wisdom and firmness. But when she told him her story, he leaned back in his chair and frowned deeply. "You are accusing the most loved woman in this village of murder and sorcery," he asked. "Your bakery failed, and hers succeeded. Are you sure this isn't jealousy speaking?" Grace shook her head, holding back anger tears. "Your Majesty, this is not jealousy. It is the truth. I've seen her take lives. She feeds on us, feeds the village dead, not stole." The king was quiet for a long time. Then he called in his chief guard, Captain Jide, and instructed him to investigate the matter discreetly. No one was to know, especially not Madam Chopfinger. Captain Jide did as ordered. Over the next 10 days, he followed the same trail Grace did, into the woods, to the altar, to the place behind Madam Chopfinger's bakery, where the air always smelled faintly of blood beneath the sugar. One night, he saw her carry something large, wrapped in clothes, into a hidden chamber. Inside, he saw glowing jars, bones packed in clay pots, and a pantry of preserved organs disguised as meat fillings. He returned to the king, pale and shaking. "Everything she said is true," he whispered. "We have been eating dead." The king called an emergency meeting. In the dead of night, he summoned every youth in the village, arming them with torches and courage. Together, they stormed the hidden room behind Madam Chopfinger's bakery. She was inside, humming softly, while preparing a fresh batch of sugar rolls. She turned around slowly and froze. The crowd burst in. Her eyes widened as she saw the king's guards, the angry youths, and Grace standing silently behind them. "What is this?" she asked coldly. But they didn't give her a chance to run. They dragged her, screaming and scratching, out of her shop and into the village square. People woke up, doors opened, mothers, fathers, and children poured into the streets, shocked to see elegant Madam Chopfinger, covered in flour and fear. Then Grace stepped forward. Her voice was clear and strong. "She has been feeding you deads. She bakes pastries with the essence of our loved ones, and no one noticed because we are all too addicted to see the truth." Gasps filled the air. Eyes darted around in disbelief. Their faces were frozen in horror as she revealed the truth about the woman they had once adored. The sweet, warm-hearted baker who filled their mouths with joy was a murderer, a soul thief, a servant of death. The king ordered his guards to take her to the palace where she would be judged before the entire village. Inside the great hall, Madam Chopfinger stood before the king, her hair wild, her gloves gone, revealing her pale scarred hands, twisted and stiff like old wood, but still she smiled. A strange, calm smile. The villagers screamed at her. Children cried. Mothers clutched their babies. Men covered their mouths, remembering the places they had devoured. Grace turned to the king. "My king," she must confess. "The truth must be heard." The king gave a nod, and silence fell over the square like heavy blankets. "What do you have to say for yourself?" the king asked sternly. She was silent for a moment. Then she began to laugh, a deep, hollow laugh that echoed off the walls. Her eyes gleamed. "Now that you have caught me, I have nothing to hide anymore." She stepped forward slowly and said, "But I will not go down alone. I didn't start as a monster. You all made me one." And with those words, the room went silent. A heavy silence fell. Then came the truth. Flashback. Years ago, she was called Nina, the youngest daughter of two loving parents who ran the village's only pastry shop. She was beautiful, smart and kind, but beauty, they say, brings envy, and no one envied her more than her own elder sister Victoria. Their parents adored Nina. They said she had golden hands for baking and a heart full of light. Victoria was bitter, cold, jealous. Then one rainy morning, tragedy struck. Their parents died in a boat accident. Before Nina could recover from her grief, Victoria struck. She forged the will. She took the house, the shop, the money. She threw Nina out with nothing but a torn suitcase and broken dreams. I was the firstborn, Victoria hissed. I deserve everything. Nina begged. She cried. She fell to her knees, but no one helped her. Nina wept in the streets. She begged for help. No one answered. Even worse, her best friend Melanie betrayed her, stealing the only man she ever loved and marrying him in secret. With no home, no family, and no food, Nina wandered into the forest to die. That's where she met her. A woman with grey skin and hollow eyes, a witch draped in cobwebs, sitting beside a boiling pot. "Do you want to live, child?" she asked. "Do you want to be great, rich, powerful, and have everything you were denied?" Nina was trembling. "Yes," she whispered. "Then give me their years," the witch said. "Bring me their life source, and I'll give you the sweetest dough the world has ever known." And so the deal was sealed. In exchange for fame, wealth, and admiration, Nina would feed the witch the life source of the villagers, cut in half, hidden in frosting and crust. The more they ate, the faster they aged, the faster they craved. She would be loved and feared. Nina became Madam Chopfinger, a name whispered in the ears of spirits, a baker of blood, a collector of souls. Back in the palace hall, the villagers watched in horror as Madam Chopfinger finished her story. "You made me a monster," she said. "You left me to rot, and so I gave you what you deserved. Sweet lies in every bite." Someone screamed. Another vomited. A child began to cry. Then from the crowd, a familiar face stepped forward. It was Victoria, her elder sister. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Nina, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have taken everything. I shouldn't have betrayed you." She dropped to her knees. "Please, forgive me." For a moment, silence. Then Madam Chopfinger walked towards her, eyes empty of warmth. She bent down and whispered into her sister's ear. "Do you think after all these years an apology will make it right?" She smiled cruelly. "Don't worry, I have other plans for you." The king stood slowly. "Enough!" he gave the order. She was banished, not just from the village, but from the land itself. Her bakery was burnt to ashes, her mansion torn down, the glowing jars were destroyed, and the altar in the forest sealed with holy fire. But before she left, she disappeared for one final night. And when the sun rose, the village woke up to horror. Victoria's house was in flames. Her body, and that of her husband and children, was found in the ruins, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths stuffed with blood-stained pastries. Down the road, another body was found. Melanie, her old best friend, her husband, their newborn child, all gone. Grace was the first to arrive at the scenes. She recognized the scent. It was the same sweet smell Madam Chopfinger always left behind. And then she vanished. No one ever saw Madam Chopfinger again. Some say she vanished into thin air. Some say the witch took her soul as payment. Others believe she's still alive, watching from another village, starting a new bakery. But in Rose Hill, no one bakes anymore. The ovens are old. The bakery stands abandoned, covered in vines and whispers. But every year, on the same Sunday she was captured, the scent of sweet pastries sometimes drifts through the Rose Hill streets. Though no ovens are burning, some say her soul still wanders, searching for another baker to carry on her curse. Others say she waits for a second chance to bake again. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share and leave a comment below. Do you think Madam Chopfinger deserved her ending? Or did the village push her too far? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's talk in the comments. Bye!